Welcome, welcome. Going to take a look here at making some statutes. Um, Came across this organization, this company over on the east side of the state. Uh, at the time that the candidates for Attorney General were announced, and within the candidate pool, one of the candidates was Tom Leonard, which got me taking a look at Tom Leonard himself and kind of his background and so on and so forth. So I thought I'd share this with you. Here was an announcement from March 2nd, 2020, where Plunkett Cooney, a firm over, again, an attorney firm, announced that Tom Leonard, former Speaker of the House, joined the organization, and he became a member in order to launch a specific group within the organization, and that group was the Government Relations Group. And so this is the press release from that. And they are not only the the Government Relations Group, but also Public Policy and Regulatory Practice Group. And they focus on policy development, strategic collaboration, building relationships and coalitions, legislative monitoring and bill tracking is what they announced at this point in time. And we'll see that they might do a few other things as well. One of the reasons, again, that it was announced here in his quotes that he was hoping to make a difference here, a significant impact in the state's future. So after joining the organization, he did some work there, and this is the group, or at least the announcement off of the website, as to the type of work that they actually do there. And one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is the members of the team work with their clients to basically streamline and attack political issues. And they're supposed to be highly qualified with all this experience to tackle legislative and regulatory issues. And they admit right here that the former Speaker of the House, he understands the legislative personalities. He has worked alongside with the state's top elected and appointed officials, so he's got a great network of people that he works together with. And of course, the legislative branch is where we consider our laws to be made and passed. So, basically, Tom can do things that few others are basically able to do. And that's basically mixes policy and politics together because of those long-term relationships with the top officials and elected and appointed. So one of the duties that he announces here as well, that he's going to ensure that their clients make appropriate connections, again, because of those relationships he has with top elected and appointed officials. And with those connections, they can get the right relationships with key legislators and other government officials to, again, effectively tackle legislation and stay ahead of the political game. So it looks like this particular organization, Government Relations, Public Policy, and Regulatory Compliance, is there to basically help organizations, their clients, get together with the right people in the legislature to basically stay ahead of the game. And so building coalitions and relationships with elected officials to ensure collaboration on client policy initiatives. So it seems to me that if we were to boil these words down and look at them a little closer, it looks like he's basically helping his clients get their initiatives by building relationships with the officials that would pass laws. So some of the other things, he's assist with public opinion legislative issues. So that seems like there's a media aspect to that as well. In fact, it even says media right there, in order to help the public adopt these things. So we're talking about the former Speaker of the House, an attorney leading up a government relations group, working with their clients to bring lawmakers together and assist the media with public opinion and regarding legal or legislative issues. acquire state and local governmental incentives for development. So that's helping the customers of theirs, which again appear to be corporate for the most part, gain state and local government incentives. Now, that's incentives from the government for development. And the government basically is implemented by the people, so basically working to get the people's incentives for development. They also prepare or work on the preparation of legislation and assistance with introduction. I think this is the largest aspect of what we're really talking about, preparing legislation. Most of us think that the laws come from the legislature, but here we can see that this Plunkett-Cooney organization, with the former Speaker of the House leading the organization for government relations, are actually preparing legislation and helping it become introduced into either the Senate or the House of Representatives. Now, they assist clients with the implementation of new state laws and regulations. Now, that could be looked at as if, here they mention the medical cannabis law. If you were a company that was involved with cannabis, then they would help you make sure that your corporate practices were compliant with state laws and regulations. But once you begin to look at the preparation of legislation and introduction, now all of a sudden assisting clients with new state laws and regulations has another meaning. And that would be, as we'll see here, I think you'll see that they're actually helping these organizations get the laws that they need passed through the legislature. So they basically develop creative solutions to meet the challenges of dealing with local, county, and state government. They help their clients develop creative solutions. Workarounds is what we call creative solutions in some industries to meet challenges in dealing with government. So in considering that, we'll go ahead and take a look here at his bio listed on the page. Again, former Speaker of the House, partner in their Lansing office who leads this particular organization. He basically served time in the Michigan House of Representatives from 2013 to 2018. And eventually, in his final term there, he was the Speaker of the House. So he's a former Speaker of the House. Let's see, he also was a prosecutor in the past, and he was part of the Special Crimes Division. Let's see. And this is some more stuff about some of his past. He worked in different areas in the public school employee retirement system. He helped with driver responsibility fees, worked on state budgets, and he worked on the mental health system. He's responsible for nearly 20 public acts signed into law, including something for the healthcare law. And he was actually responsible for the reformation of the criminal preliminary examination system within courts. So for people that have been to court before, you have pre-trials and status conferences. Well, preliminary examinations are another thing that are dealt with, and Tom Leonard was part of that as well. He was served on a law revision commission, which would fit for that, competitiveness committee, judiciary committee, and he also worked on the House Insurance Committee. So that's a little bit on the background for him. Some of the other groups and organizations that he's part of, one of these he mentions down here, Sweet Savor Ministries. And he's got quite a few honors and recognitions, including from Michigan State and other organizations as well. So in looking at that aspect of Tom, we'll go ahead and take a look over at another member within his organization. And that's a gentleman named Chris Young. He's part of the Government Relations, Public Policy, and Regulatory Compliance as an advisor. And so he's a client advisor. He's former chief of staff in the House of Representatives to the Democratic leader, Christine Grigg. And he provides further depth to the government relations practice, particularly with lawmakers and other elected. So lawmakers, which would mean in the legislative branch, and other elected state, county, and local officials that are affiliated to the Democratic Party. So he used to work at AT&T as an external affairs director, and while he was there, he developed legislative and local government relationship to support company initiatives. So he was at AT&T working to develop relationships and ties to governments. And while he was at the company there, he also administered the company's Political Action Committee, Michigan's PAC, and the corporate political contributions. And these part of his accomplishments while he was at AT&T. So this is rather strange here. While he was at AT&T, he was somewhat responsible for a public act. And public act are something that we consider laws, but here this is a legislative accomplishment for him while he was at AT&T, which that act created the Small Wireless Facilities and Public Act this. And he also, while at AT&T, updated the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. So to think that laws only come from the legislative branch, for some reason here at this law firm that appears to be helping companies like that, they've recruited somebody out of AT&T who was responsible for basically managing and dealing with the corporate political contributions of AT&T and managing the local political action committee. So one of the laws that he was responsible for creating, as it brags about here, is Public Act 4 of 2009 to update the Uniform Video Services Local Franchise Act. And we'll take a look at that here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to share one of the organizations that he's helped with quite a bit, or one of the companies that they've worked with over there at Plunkett Cooney. And this is off of their client testimonials page. And they basically, within the government relations, same group, one of the clients is an organization known as BAMF, or BAMF Health. They work in the medical industry, cancer, neurodegenerative disorders, and they're based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And in Michigan, that meant navigating and achieving a certificate of need. Whoops, didn't mean to delete that, but see, I'll go ahead and get rid of that. So he was working on trying to get the certificate of need approval during a global pandemic. So that was a problem that this corporation had, and that is that they had to navigate the laws, the legal system, in order to get a certificate of need so they can begin doing their business. And so because they had a problem with the law, they chose Plunkett Cooney to engage the Michigan legislature to expedite that process. And so they even brag right here, their knowledge of the process and policy issues resulted in Senate Bill 440 being passed by the legislature and signed by the governor in record time. So apparently, if you've got a problem with the law being in the way or a need to work around the law, the best way to do that is to come to Plunkett Cooney, and they'll help you draft a bill to put into the Senate and get it passed by the legislature. So the governor will even sign it in record time. So due to the partnership, they are opening their state-of-the-art radio pharmacy molecular imaging clinic and their corporate headquarters in June of 2022. I haven't checked to see if they've actually opened it yet, but this is just one client testimonial as to why Plunkett Cooney is offering the government relations, public policy, and regulatory compliance. And that is the group that Tom Leonard is responsible for leading. So some of the other members of the group are Chris Young, and as we said, and so to look at one of Chris Young's works and see what he was responsible for was that, let me go back a little bit, the Uniform Video Services Local Franchise Act. So he was part of developing that while he was there. And so it turns out that I did a search for that using the Scholar Google, and I came across a court case where the state of Michigan and Comcast were being sued by Detroit. Now, originally it was just Comcast of Detroit being sued, and the state of Michigan was intervened And so did the Michigan Attorney General in order to step in on behalf of that. So when it comes down to it, we have the city of Detroit, which is basically a representative of the people or there on behalf of the people. They were suing Comcast, a business, and the state of Michigan became part of the lawsuit. So here we've got the people suing the people, and the Michigan Attorney General is an intervening defendant. So a couple of things in here. Here it is. The name of the law took effect by operation of state law, the Uniform Video Services Local Franchise Act, which is Michigan Compiled Law 484.3301. And it took effect in 2007 and resulted in the elimination of the terms in the old franchise agreement that the city seeks to enforce. So here we had a situation basically where the city wanted to use an agreement, a franchise agreement that already existed, and because of this new law that was passed, we end up in a lawsuit because the city wants to use the old agreement, but somehow, some way, this new law came into effect, which not somehow, some way, but apparently that's through Plunkett Cooney and Chris's efforts. The Uniform Video Services Local Franchise Act became law as well. So there was this lawsuit. As you go through it, basically there's a problem where the city insists that provisions of this act are preempted by federal law and violate the Michigan's Constitution. And the end result is that Comcast must comply with the old agreement until the new one is approved, until a new agreement is approved by the city. So the court denied Comcast's motion to dismiss. The Michigan Attorney General intervened to defend the Michigan Act. So here now, all of a sudden, the Michigan Attorney General, which again is funded pretty much by the people, intervened to basically hold the act valid or constitutional, which was developed by Plunkett Cooney. And Comcast is just one entity in the cable and media area, and so it was likely developed for a different entity other than Comcast, like AT&T or another one along those lines that have franchises running through the municipalities. So I highlighted a couple of things in here just to take a look at some of the things that are going on in this case. But basically this law that was created by Plunkett Cooney's Chris, forgive me, I'll have to pull his last name back up there. Shouldn't call him by his first name, that's Tom. Chris Young, my bad. So this lawsuit has been broken down by the city of Detroit versus Comcast, including the Attorney General in the state of Michigan. And here, as we continue to look through it, there are some areas in here which are highlighted as you go through it, or at least I had highlights. There's one. So the Michigan Act was intended to facilitate new cable operators' entrance in the market through Michigan communities in order to foster competition by eliminating the cumbersome process of navigating through the requirements of the municipalities. So just like BAMF, this law was crafted and adopted in order to basically work their way around the individual municipalities, because it's just such a cumbersome process for these businesses to have to follow the law and jump through all the hoops. So rather than do that, an organization like Plunkett Cooney can just go ahead and create a brand new law for you so you can get around doing what you want to do. And that's what this Michigan Act was about. So it was not intended to favor incumbent operators, because they actually enjoyed a de facto monopoly. And Comcast is in effect one of those incumbent operators who have a de facto monopoly. So they actually were, theoretically, they say their motive was to encourage more providers to enter the market. So the House Fiscal Agency actually did an analysis of it, and that you can go ahead through this court case and take a look at some of the analysis and the dates, and you can even get it from the legislative site at michigan.gov, documents, bill analysis, and so on and so forth. So it was promulgated in 2007. Cable operator cannot provide cable or video services within an area without first obtaining a franchise from the local unit of government. And again, that's such a pain in the butt for these poor people here, like Comcast, and it's so cumbersome that it's actually easier apparently to just go get a law firm that's headed up with a former Speaker of the House to pass these laws for you, and then that you can go ahead and bypass these problems. But as you can see, this particular law created such a problem that they ended up in court over it. So if the franchising entity, which is the local municipality, does not notify the provider regarding the completeness of the franchise agreement or approve the franchise agreement within the time periods required under the subsection, the franchise agreement shall be considered complete and approved. This was one of the clauses that's basically written into that 484.3303. So what that law did was basically say that the local municipality, the city, had what we learned is 30 days to basically go through this process. And if they didn't do these steps within 30 days, it automatically consummated a complete agreement, and that the approval was automatic. And so this created a problem for Comcast because of the fight between the city and the old franchise agreements and this new one here. And of course, the new one was theoretically only going to be for new businesses, but here Comcast was basically being involved with it as well. So they had, shall be renewed or extended upon the expiration date of the agreement, and that's part of those same laws. Instead, the Act establishes 3 ways to create a valid franchise agreement. So we're basically talking about laws that allow corporations to operate within a municipality. So another thing about the laws that was passed is it created a form so you can have a uniform situation. The form itself specifically prevents the municipalities from altering the uniform franchise agreement. So again, if the government and the municipalities and the law is too difficult, if you're a big enough business or if you choose to hire Plunkett Cooney, they can basically get these statutes and these laws passed for your business, so they can actually change and prevent municipalities from being able to impact your business. So parties have arguments that they get in there. So the city contends that the Article 7, Section 29 of the Constitution commits to local governments the authority to issue franchises to public utilities seeking to operate within their city boundaries. And the Michigan Act, which is this act that was created, as we now know, by Chris Young over at Plunkett Cooney, this Michigan Act contravenes that provision by prescribing a uniform franchise agreement that interferes with the city's authority to negotiate terms. So again, what a nice way to accomplish your business goals is to have some laws come in there that actually handicap and stop the local municipalities from being able to do what they want to do. And all that the local municipalities can do now is basically sue Comcast. And what happens but the state of Michigan steps in on behalf of Comcast's side, and then the Attorney General steps in, and now again we've got this expensive litigation for the people between the city, the Attorney General, and the state all over this legislation that was created. So here again, intervening defendant, state of Michigan. So the state of Michigan was the one that intervened and stepped in, basically stating that local governments, and doesn't this make sense? The state of Michigan steps in and says the local governments are creatures of legislation and a division of the state, and thereby we control them. They don't have authority above and beyond what we give them, and that's what Michigan stepped in, the state of Michigan stepped in to argue. And so then next thing you know, they're arguing about the state constitution, the different articles and sections, about the municipality's authority, and whether or not they are subject to constitution and law. And so again, an expensive litigation for the taxpayers when you basically have laws like these that are created in the legislature by an organization like Plunkett Cooney, and then it creates a lawsuit that every single member, I mean, if you think about it here, if the municipalities are creatures of legislations and subdivisions of the state, how is the city of Detroit suing the state of Michigan? And why is the state of Michigan stepping in on behalf of Comcast? It seems like the left hand is suing the right hand, and the attorney general, the tongue, is stepping in there to be a co-defendant too. So even the state of Michigan uses the argument that they're part of us, yet they're fighting against themselves. So what do we do when our local doesn't agree with the state? We sue each other basically through a corporate entity being involved, and now all of a sudden we're fighting amongst ourselves and paying for the whole fight. So kind of a strange scenario when you think about it, especially when it's supposed to be that these entities are there for on behalf of the people. And so here the Cable Act, Michigan Act versus the older Cable Act, incorporates that the Michigan Consumer Protection Act. And just the other day, did a clip, and we talked about the Michigan Consumer Protection Act, the MCPA, and it was, of course, between Zine and Zine is the way I pronounce it, Zine and Chrysler. And so here, these acts also fully incorporate the protection acts for us. So are they protecting our wallet? Are they protecting our budgets? Are they protecting our tax rates when basically the city and municipality and instrumentality of the state is now suing, in effect, the state? It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but that's the way things are contrived here. The ultimate question is whether Comcast is in compliance with the terms of both federal and state law that mandates that a valid franchise be in place before a cable operator can furnish and charge for cable services in a municipality. So that's really what's kind of going on here, is that if you're going to do business here, you need to be compliant with the law. And this law that was passed basically causes the local municipality, which is supposed to be there to protect the consumers in their locality, are basically being hamstrung by this confusion between this new law that was passed and the Michigan Act, as they call it here, versus the Cable Act that existed before. And of course, the Cable Act and the Michigan Act are also supposed to be in compliance with the FCC's federal regulations. So there's all kinds of arguments throughout this case between Comcast, the state. They cite court cases as to how they're going to handle it, as is the typical pleadings and opinions. So the state argues that the city has no standing, which, I mean, there you have it. The city brings the suit against Comcast for violating it, and then the state steps in and says its municipality can't do that, which, you know, if that was the case, then the ruling at the end of this wouldn't be so. So it's kind of interesting if you take, as we get through this, the state, which is intervening on behalf of Comcast, is basically saying that the city doesn't have the right to do this, and the city is part of us. So the state ends up being wrong, and you'll see that later as we get down to the ruling at the bottom. So some other things in here. Comcast's failure to provide those services and funds, which Comcast is, the franchise agreement allows the local municipality to demand that we have local public channels available to us, and that we have a particular infrastructure that's given to the government systems and services to the city itself, as well as funds in order to help cover and take care of these things. And so Comcast basically has now, by operating under this new agreement or being lost in the confusion, they failed to provide those services and funds, which become the concrete factual claim that allows the court to adjudicate this dispute under an Article 3 court. So Article 3 courts exist, and here they are dealing with Comcast and the city versus the city. So here the court is actually saying it does have subject matter jurisdiction to hear the city's claim against Comcast, because Comcast has damaged the people by not paying the funds and providing the services that are required under a franchise agreement. And then there's also a risk that Comcast will continue to withhold these services and funds, which constitutes a hardship faced by the city if the court refuses to adjudicate the complaint. So, you know, we started off here where the state steps in and says its own instrumentality has no standing to sue, but then it turns out that, the city is actually correct according to the courts on their way through this here. So, it does maintain that the Michigan Act conflicts with the Cable Act. So the new law that was drafted by Plunkett Cooney and by Chris Young over there, who's taking credit for it, conflicts with the Cable Act. So the new law didn't get written as something that enhances or enforces law. It's actually conflicting. It goes against, it doesn't fit with the law. But because it is, both because it is impossible to comply with certain aspects of both law, and because the Michigan Act creates an obstacle to achieving the purposes. So this was a preemption that applied. This is part of the argument. The city argues that the Michigan Act is preempted by the Cable Act because you can't comply with both of them. So these are just part of the arguments that are brought up based on the confusion created by this new legislation, which resulted in this court case. So the Michigan Act renewal procedures do not contradict the Cable Act, and that was the ruling after that argument before, and are not preempted on that basis, as it would not be physically impossible to comply with both of the Michigan Act and the Cable Act. So they put their arguments together. The court comes back and says, oh, you could comply with both, and it would not be physically impossible to comply with both. So, they don't contradict. So now here's a spot where the Michigan Attorney General, on behalf of the state. So again, in one of the clips that were done recently, we talked about how the Michigan Attorney General represents pretty much every department in the state, of the state, by the state, and here they stepped in on behalf of the state. And they point out, and correctly so, that the court should interpret the state law in a way that's consistent with federal law, and also that they want to maintain its constitutionality. I mean, they actually wrote it in there that if you find out our stuff, our laws and legislation that's written could be found unconstitutional, or could be broad or vague, or all these things, every reasonable construction must be resorted to in order to save a statute from unconstitutionality. This has been a problem in a couple of cases, because once they find a way, it seems like, to save it and call it constitutional, they don't seem to give an accurate reading after the fact. It creates that precedent, that traditional control of the common law, allowing them to call it constitutional, even though reasonable construction would infer that it's not. So here, the Michigan Act allows the parties to negotiate additional terms on a consensual basis. This is something that was written in that new act that Plunkett Cooney helped, or that Chris Young has on his resume there, is that this new act allowed the parties, i.e. the city and Comcast, to negotiate additional terms on a consensual basis. So, we can go ahead and take a look at all the laws and regulations and rules and policies, but this new law allows us to negotiate other terms, and as long as we consent to it and we agree upon it, well, then that's part of the law. So we don't need the letter of the law anymore if we got a consensual contract. So the Michigan Act does contain language that seems to vitiate the municipality's power. So again, just like BAMF, if you got a problem with the law being in your way, perhaps Plunkett Cooney could go ahead and draft a new act for you, and you can get it sped through the legislature and signed by the governor in record speed. And that language that could be within that law could actually vitiate the municipality's power. And now, so this municipality is down at the local level. So the local organizations, the local governments that are there for consumer protection, to regulate the use of your local land by these businesses, can basically use an organization to get new acts put in there that can rip their power apart. And so the franchise agreement shall be considered complete and the franchise agreement approved, again, if they don't take action within 30 days after the submission date of a complete franchise agreement. So here they built in there that they can negotiate on a consensual basis and create a new agreement, But here, soon as the company completes a form and submits it 30 days after it being completed, it's just automatically considered approved and valid. So just by submitting the form, you have 30 days to get there. And that form, the application, which is a standard form for these companies to use, isn't a negotiation form. It's not a bid for a request for proposal or a bid response to a request for proposal. It's an application that is standard across the industry. Yet at the same time, they got this built-in concept of building a consensus and building an agreement. But once they turn in a complete agreement, franchise agreement, they have 30 days until it becomes considered complete and approved. So again, this is just one of the ways that it seems like the local municipality's power has been denigrated. So the court finds that the Michigan Act's procedures for renewal, as so interpreted, do not conflict and therefore are not preempted by the Cable Act and do not violate the Michigan Constitution. So with all the arguments that they had before about whether or not these acts were actually consistent with each other and with the Constitution, the court came through and said, no, this is fine, this works just fine. It doesn't violate, because they do work together, and it doesn't violate the Constitution. So apparently, writing in language that eviscerates the municipality's power, because I guess the municipality is a member of the state. The state's left hand says they don't have the right to do it. The court says, yes, the right hand does have the right to do it. But heck, all of this stuff is consistent with what we want happening in Michigan, and it doesn't violate our Constitution. So they allow it to continue going forward. So again, the franchising authority shall make final decisions within 120 days. So all kinds of things that basically locked, in this case, the city of Detroit, into specific actions within specific timelines, creating the problems that we have. So here, because authorities may only enforce demands for adequate channel support, that's public education and government channels. So a franchisee like Comcast is required to give public and educational and government channel support. So because the authorities may only enforce demands for, quote, adequate, it asserts that because the Act does not define adequate, the state, as the ultimate franchising authority, has the right to determine what constitutes adequate support. This seems to be, adequate is a common language term. And because it's not defined at law, it's considered a term of art instead of a legal term. And so a term of art basically gets to be defined by the authority along the way. So here the state says that they're the ultimate franchising authority, which is again back why they said the city didn't have a right to sue or didn't have any standing. But we find out again that the local franchising authority is the actual one with a right to do it, and they do have standing. So adequate here is written into the terminology, and it's broad and it's vague, and next thing you know, it becomes an argument within a court case. So again, when you go back to an organization like Plunkett Cooney, who's drafting these things, they write in broad terms like adequate. Now, if you take a look at Law 750.170 or MCL 750.170 in Michigan, you'll find that it's got terms like disturbance in there and a couple other terms like may or excite. And those types of terms are just as broad and undefined as adequate. And if you were to look at 750.170, you'd see that it's been deemed unconstitutional. Oh, but only certain words and parts. But by doing so, they don't go back and address other parts of that same act. And so somehow the same logic that would apply to some of the terms doesn't ever get applied again. So again, they do everything they can to maintain a statute as constitutional once they've written it. And even though it's got words like adequate in there, which are not defined and become part of an argument. So the Michigan Act, which again is that same 484.33, prohibits franchising authorities, which would be, in this case, the city of Detroit, from enforcing franchise provisions that the Cable Act grants the authorities the explicit power to enforce. So the new law prohibits, this was an argument that was put forward, the new law prohibits the authorities from enforcing the provisions that the Cable Act granted the authorities the explicit power to enforce. So again, if you're going to have a problem with the law and you don't want the law coming down on you, why not run over to Plunkett Cooney and maybe Chris Young can draft you a new law that prohibits the government from enforcing the provisions that the old law allowed them specifically to enforce. So sure, it'd be nice, you know, if you got a drunk driving case, all of a sudden you call Plunkett Cooney and they wrote in there that the local police weren't allowed to pull you over for drunk driving. That's in effect the same thing. The local authorities can't enforce the law that the other laws gave them the express powers to enforce. So these are just parts of the problems that we have going on here now with laws and how they're being adopted, grafted, created on behalf of these businesses. Here's Quest Broadband Services versus the city of Boulder. Wonder if the state stepped in down there. And here they're actually bringing in laws from other states and trying to give a bearing. They also get into the federal codes from the FCC and checking to see that they're also compliant there. So again, this is the Michigan Compiled Law 48433.13. It doesn't prohibit a local unit of government and a video service provider from entering into a voluntary franchise agreements that includes terms and conditions different from those required under this act. So wouldn't that be nice if you can actually sit down with the local police and work out an agreement that although the law says one thing, we can have a private agreement for me to go ahead and do whatever I want. Again, think back to the drunk driving instance that I just brought up again. So here they cite the law, and then therefore, although it might be said that the Michigan Act tips the balance implicated in the Cable Act towards the protection of the cable companies. So here the city of Detroit is the municipality, and it's there by the people, for the people, to help safeguard the people, especially from corporations, in this case a cable company. And this new law, it can be said that it actually, Michigan Act, tips the balance implicated in the Cable Act to help the business, the cable company. So it, again, is exactly why business might, like BAMF or AT&T or Comcast, might actually go to an organization like Plunkett Cooney. And what a benefit to have a former Speaker of the House in the Legislature branch running the whole organization, who's got all kinds of ties and friends. In fact, that's the key benefit to going there into their government relations and public policies group, is that they've got all these friends in the legislature that can fast track your law or fast track your bill into being law in order to get these things done in case you need to have an opportunity to do business that would not otherwise be allowed because of regulations and rules. So they got into the idea of holdover tenancy, which is, you know, when your lease expires, you're considered a holdover under the old lease. So here the court basically said that neither the city nor Comcast has pursued a contested case concerning the renewal. So they didn't even bring this up. The parties have not successfully negotiated additional terms on a consensual basis. So the new law gave them the ability to negotiate these new terms, and they didn't do that, and they haven't fought about a contested case about renewal. And again, the new Michigan law is about bringing new business in. But because the city responded in a timely manner, no new franchise agreement has taken effect by operation of state law. So there's nothing in the law that basically is automatically giving Comcast their new franchise agreement to operate. Therefore, there is no franchise agreement in place that allows Comcast to engage in a cable operation in the city of Detroit. Yep. So since there's no franchise agreement, Comcast would not be allowed to offer cable operations in the city of Detroit. And that was part of the argument, and they go through pointing out all these different court cases, and the Michigan Supreme Court held, and they talk about a rail car company, sorry. They talk about using them on public streets. And then the Supreme Court concluded, right? So the city of Detroit, Michigan Supreme Court found that the city could compel to cease operating in the city and to remove its tracks from the street. So they're just basically talking about other similar court cases where the court's already made ruling, and that of course would have a bearing on current case. So here the city argues that because Comcast has continued to operate in the city without an agreement, it has enjoyed a windfall and been unjustly enriched to the detriment of the city. So that's the city's argument. And eventually neither defendant has addressed the city's remedial arguments. So the state, as well as the Attorney General, as well as Comcast, has not addressed the city's remedial arguments. The court believes that additional briefing would assist in the determination of an appropriate remedy. Therefore, the court will direct the parties to file briefs addressing that issue. So the city brought up other arguments, and because they weren't addressed, they're going to have to go ahead and do more paperwork, do more filings, and spend more money trying to work out this workaround law that seems to be drafted by Chris Young over at Plunkett Cooney. So the conclusion here in the court case, first of all, the court finds that it does not have subject matter to adjudicate the city's claims in this one area based on preemption and lack of standing and ripeness. The court does have jurisdiction to decide whether the renewal and mods procedures in the Act are preempted and whether the Michigan Act can curtail the enforcement of existing requirements in the franchise agreement. So the state came in and argued that the city didn't have any standing, but the court turned around and said, oh, yes, we find that it does. And the court finds that although the Michigan's Act renewal provisions are not preempted by the Cable Act, so one is not being stopped by the other, the provisions that purport to modify existing franchise agreements by operational law, which means by agreement, to curtail a municipality's authority to enforce requirements in their existing agreements are expressly preempted by the Cable Act. So what that basically means is this new Michigan Act that tried to grant some kind of authority for this situation or an opportunity for the situation are actually barred or preempted by the former law, the prior law that they're identifying here as the Cable Act. So, this law basically works in both directions. Certain things are not preempted by the Cable Act, and other things are expressly preempted by the Cable Act. So, if we go further, Comcast must be considered a trespasser. So because Michigan law will not permit Comcast to be treated as a holdover tenant, Comcast is considered a trespasser. So ordered, defendant Comcast and intervening defendant state of Michigan, they get a partial summary judgment. Further order that Comcast is a trespasser in the city of Detroit when they place their facilities and equipment. And further, the parties have to file more paperwork in order to deal with a trespass and the fact that Comcast doesn't have a franchise agreement at this point in time, thus making it a trespasser. So this is the benefit that comes out of having an organization streamline a law through on behalf of their corporate clients. If they didn't develop it for Comcast, it was developed for one of their other clients, and now Comcast is fighting against that. So I thought that was kind of an interesting look at what was going on there. Now, within Plunkett Cooney, they also kind of have within that group, the government relations group, they put out a kind of a newsletter, a caucus call. And here's some of the people again with their contact information that are part of the group. So one of the things that happened in February 14th of this year, the judiciary got significant budget increases from the governor's proposal. $175 million allotted for a statewide case management system. A few days ago, we looked at the role of the Michigan Attorney General in consumer and environmental affairs from 1974. And one of the big things that they thought would be valuable back in 1974 would be a singular statewide case management system, because it would allow them to basically get down to the local levels and allow the Attorney General to pick which cases to intervene in. And so here, $175 million is going towards that singular case management system. And they even kind of basically laid it out here that Whitmer is the one that's given the money for this. The proposal has been suggested for many years by the state court administrator's office, which is again part of the courts. However, funding has been the main issue. So they haven't figured out where to get the money, but heck, they figured out where to get it now. So with this budget proposal, it seems the state is ready to make the commitment to connecting all the local courts. So this is what happens by basically using a central repository system, a case management system. It basically ties all of your local courts into the state court and allows, ultimately, as we'll see in more opportunities, the Attorney General intervening and dictating what's going on here. So here's some of the other benefits, is that 1.7 million is going to the state's appellate defender's office. So they're going to spend a lot of money on the appeals court defenders. So apparently the people that are found guilty already or have a bad court case, the defender's office for the appeals is going to get $1.7 million more money in order to help support those people or persons that would need an appeal and can't afford it, or maybe it just goes to the overall office. 1.1 million to expand access to the civil justice system, 1 million to the Supreme Court for the management, support, and guidance of the overall entire judicial branch. So extra million just to help manage it. Almost $500,000 to implement their mandatory judicial continuing education requirement. So, people are talking about, giving money to mental health and giving it to all these other areas. Well, $500,000 out of the state's budget from Governor Whitmer is going into teaching the judges. Do we really need scholarship opportunities for students coming up? No, we need to spend the money on people that are already employed and supposedly are bound to the law, should know the law, but it's for continuing education in the Supreme Court's area. 393 to increase staffing for the Judicial Tenure Commission. So just a side branch, the Tenure Commission, that's not judges, that's not clerks, that's not the computer system, but they're going to spend $393,000 more on the Tenure Commission, which is where you would complain if you got a problem with judges. So that's kind of what's going on there. One of these things that I want you to notice too is within the Plunkett Cooney's newsletter here, payday lending is being brought up. Michigan's payment to the transaction system, the House Regulatory Reform Committee took testimony on House Bill 4004, which basically increases loan amounts from $600 to $2,500. So we're talking about what you call payday loans and lending in that aspect. And the Michigan Board of Canvassers approved language to an initiative that would cap the interest of these types of loans at 36%. So you're talking about, if you get a little tiny loan from $600 to $2,500 from a cash advance thing, you're paying over 1/3 in interest back. And, on top of service fees that are above that. So this is one of the areas that they're talking about, payday lending issue and things that they were addressing there. In the week ahead, they had Utility Consumer Participation Board is going to be meeting, Gaming Control Board, so lotteries, tax commission, marijuana regulatory agencies, Mackinac Straits. Oh, look at that, the Certificate of Need Commission will meet. So, heck, if you were BAMF, those might be some good friends of yours over there at the Certificate of Need area. And of course, the Environmental Rules Review Committee is going on. And again, we looked recently at the role of the Michigan Attorney General in consumer and environmental affairs. So if you have any questions, of course, they say on the content of this caucus call, this newsletter, go ahead and contact them, especially within the government relations group, and you saw some of those phone numbers at the beginning. So now that we're looking at these things here, let's see if we can go back to finding the one here on him. Let's see, Attorney General, Pension Fund, Calvin's. So these were the things that he worked with. Again, he let's see if they got his business listed in here. Nope. Okay. So with that, we're going to jump over here. Now, continuing to look at Tom Leonard. Tom Leonard created a new company. Ex-House Speaker forms a consulting firm, and he lands Gilbert as a first client. So he's an ex-Speaker of the House, and he's managed to start his own corporation, and it's a newly formed consulting firm led by Tom Leonard, and he announced Quicken Loans chairman Dan Gilbert as its first client. So his policy and strategy firm called My Strategies LLC will advise Gilbert's Quicken Loans on policy issues aimed at improving Michigan's high insurance rate, transportation challenge, and talent attraction. So we got a shared passion, he said, about each other, a love for Detroit, and Leonard will not be lobbying for Gilbert, who already has his own legislative team, but will provide strategic advice and help build coalitions on priority issues. So this was back in 2019 when this was done. So he's already helped pass legislative issues, and now we can see that he's also helping corporations. Here, Gilbert, who's got Quicken Loans, build coalitions and giving him strategic advice in order to work on such a things. So in taking a look, here's your My Strategies LLC. It was created January 23rd, 2019, about 3 years ago. And he is the only agent listed, or the only officer that's listed there, and he is up to date pretty much in most of his paperwork. So we do find that it's a legitimate organization as far as being created in the corporate world of databases. So one of the things I wanted to share as well is that, back in January of this year, he was part of the race for Attorney General, and he actually outraised Nessel in their race for ag. Although Nessel has more money, Tom Leonard seemed to outraise him in a particular quarter, according to their campaign finance filings. So apparently, Leonard, former speaker, managed to raise $283,480 from October 21st through December 31st. So you're talking, barely over a month. What would you maybe call it, a month and a half? And he had that kind of money on hand. Now, Nessel reported raising less during that time period, but she had $1.6 million on hand. And DePerno, who is now the remaining GOP candidate, hadn't filed his paperwork yet. And there was a gentleman named Ryan Berman who was also participating. Now, they talk about how other former candidates had done in prior roles. Some, spokeswoman for Nessel's campaign, supporters see what a strong job Attorney Nessel is doing and are putting their money with a winner. Now, again, that came from her own spokesman or spokesperson. So, you got to take that with a grain of salt. I recall Dana Nessel was the one who basically ran the COVID, shut down the businesses, shut down the schools, masked the people, keep everybody off the road. As the Attorney General, she was the one that was out chasing down restaurant owners and enforcing all these things and having people arrested for not complying with executive orders. So, she, according to her own people, what a strong job. But I'd say the people think it's quite to the contrary. Dana is in a commanding position against whatever extremist the Republicans nominate to run against her. To me, extreme was putting masks on our children, or forcing them to get a vaccination in order to go to school. that hadn't been tested and hadn't been fully developed like some of the other vaccinations that children have been taking for decades. So I think it's interesting as well that early in all of this, right off the bat, her own campaign people are calling anybody against her an extremist. I mean, isn't that kind of the way things are going right now? If you don't agree with them, you just must be an extremist on the opposite side of the alley. So, Leonard's campaign touted the numbers as proof that Nessel is the most vulnerable Democrat on the 2022 ticket. I would say that's the case too. I would say, being that she is the chief enforcement officer on the businesses to manage the statutes against the commercial entities within the state, and she was the one responsible for carrying out the executive orders against the people where there really isn't any authority if they're not businesses. She is the most vulnerable Democrat on the ticket. And I think that Leonard's campaign is correct in that area in making that statement. I think the people of Michigan are being sidetracked into the governor's roles and duties in order to take their eyes off of the attorney general's role, where law enforcement is truly centered at this point in time. And so, Tom Leonard's campaign has been met with overwhelming support and enthusiasm, and they were looking forward to continuing on with it. So that of course isn't Tom Leonard isn't running anymore, it's DePerno, and a lot of those people are now behind him. So I look forward to Dana Nessel being replaced as the Attorney General in Michigan. And of course, you got some polls in here, but this is kind of interesting. Nessel's largest contributors include Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan PAC. They gave her 20 grand. The Michigan Education Association. So this MEA, or the National Education Association. I think I just watched Donna Brandenburg's broadcast this morning where constitutionalist Sheriff John Tater was on, and he was showing some of the things that the educational associations are passing around for the LGBTQ, which is bringing such things into the schools. And so, here Nessel was given money by those types of organizations at $20,000, equal to the Blue Cross Blue Shield PAC. Rock Holdings State PAC gave her $10,000. Nessel reported paying more than $40,000 to Dykema Gossett for consulting services. So I imagine that's an attorney firm or an accounting firm, as well as $30,000 for consulting from Two Rivers Public Affairs, who Jeff Timmer is a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project and Independence for Biden. So that's where she was paying her money. Leonard reported contributing $60,000 of his own campaign money. So out of that, in order, I guess, to make that win and come over the top, $60,000 of that was his money. He also reported $32,000 from a PAC, the Michigan Values Leadership Fund too, as well as $10,000 from State Representative Thomas Albert's PAC, Albert Majority Fund PAC. And then, of course, his expenses went to consulting fees at Templar Baker Group and some to Turnberry Group. So this is kind of the money that's going on within there, and where they're getting their money from and who they're getting their money to. So Tom Leonard, of course, has at this point in time been announced as a member of Plunkett Cooney, and he's a former Speaker of the House, and he had been running for Attorney General and was raising money in that area. And he had started a My Strategies organization for consulting, and was basically supporting one of the industry insurance Quicken Loans. Now, Quicken Loans, you'd think, how much of that is actually on insurance versus those payday loans we just saw them talking about? That's something I'd have to investigate more, but it seems like Quicken Loans and the loans and money lending would fit more in line with what we just saw within their caucus report. Now, one of the other things that I noticed is that on Tom Leonard's resume there, he pointed out that he's part of Sweet Saber Ministries. So look that up, and here it is right there. The leadership in the United States includes Pastor Larry Fouts, Richard Butcher, Tom Leonard III. So Tom Leonard right there. So, and it's a church, has members all over the country, including this area supposedly. And they do stuff all over the world, taking things around the world. So here it is taking a look at their corporate identity. They were inactive for a little while, and then all of a sudden no longer inactive. So Richard Butcher is the treasurer. Larry Fouch, you can see, is the president. So here's Larry Fouch, president and agent. And down here you can see Tom Leonard as the director. So he's one of the officers there in the company. And it's been around for about 17 years, and it's based over in Flint, 4445 North Center Road in Flint. So in looking at that, found their website and noticed that they got this great donate button. It's about the only thing on the site. And they have a list of all the places that they go and do these things. And this here is the page for the United States. So about all it seems to do on any of the pages has a donate button, donate, donate, donate. So it to see an attorney in a church and in a My Strategies thing, it makes me start to wonder, about how all of this funding gets developed and gets raised. Now, what I also found interesting is in digging around and looking, Larry Fouts listed here as an agent and and the pastor, if you will, president and pastor. Notice as well that his name popped up in a search as part of the Michigan Film Office Advisory Council. So Governor Whitmer has a Film Office Advisory Council, and they're supposed to assist the office and the fund in promoting, encouraging, and facilitating film and related production in the state, develop strategies and methods to attract film, television, and related businesses to the state. So this is, Whitmer. The page is Whitmer, Appointments, Boards, and Commissions, Michigan Film Office Advisory Council. So as we run through here, it's, there's a home page. You can get meeting information. It's created by statutes and laws, which again were from the legislative branch. Perhaps organizations like Plunkett Cooney helped develop such things. And then they tell you who's been seated on this particular advisory council. And as we run through there's all these different people from these other areas. Some local film offices, some in the industry. And so we make it all the way down here. And eventually the last line on here, we have Larry Fouts in Flint, which is also where that Sweet Savor Ministries Center is located. And he's actually a nominee of the Speaker of the House. So kind of interesting how the pastor, president, co-director of Sweet Savor Ministries was nominated by the Speaker of the House, who's even sitting in well, I guess his term just ended now that we're into October, whose term just recently ended. But Larry Fouts was basically sitting in Governor Whitmer's Film Advisory Council at recommendation by the Speaker of the House. So he was a nominee. Now, as I was digging through all of these things and looking at this, I came across something else that was somewhat alarming. And I noticed, let's see, let me go back to that one. There was a federal indictment against a former Illinois Speaker of the House. So, I was looking at former Speaker of the House, and up popped this one, and it was in Chicago. A federal grand jury in Chicago has charged the former Speaker of the House, Madigan, with corruptly arranging for payments to be made to a political ally as part of an alleged conspiracy involving AT&T Illinois. Now, where was it again that Chris Young used to work? Do we need to go back there and take a look? Where was it that Chris Young worked? Yeah. Oh, that's Tom Leonard. Chris Young, formerly at AT&T. So here's Chris Young, formerly at AT&T, and they're doing things together, and now he's over at Plunkett Cooney, and so is a former Speaker of the House over at Plunkett Cooney. And what were they doing? Arranging payments to be made to allies as part of a conspiracy in relation to the phone companies. So Madigan was originally indicted earlier this year on racketeering and bribery charges for allegedly using his official position to corruptly solicit and receive personal financial rewards for himself and his associates. So to solicit and receive rewards for him and his associates. Isn't that kind of like the same thing as nominating one of your associates to sit in the Michigan's uh, Film Advisory Council. I mean, I don't know if there's an actual financial payment for this. Maybe that's just a voluntary thing, but I mean, here it's a personal friend or a personal coworker, an ally, right? I don't know if they're politically aligned or not, but they're financially aligned for sure. And this whole entity over at Plunkett Cooney is all about political allies in order to get things done on behalf of companies like AT&T. I mean, why else would you need to have a law passed like, what is it, Uniform Video Services Local Franchise Act? Isn't that exactly, I mean, Detroit Public Lighting Authority. I mean, these are the things that are basically being done over there. Neighborhood Enterprise Zone Act of 2005. I mean, he worked for AT&T. That's what they do, is bring these relationships together to get laws passed. So isn't that the same thing? Solicit and receive personal financial rewards for themselves and their associates. Now, I don't know that Tom's getting any personal rewards, uh, or whether it's actually a financial reward for their associates, but they most certainly are using their relationships to get corporations rewards by passing legislation streamlined according to the BAMF customer testimonial. So the original accused Madigan and his close friend, McLean, of causing the utility company to make payments to one of their allies as a reward for their loyalty to Madigan, at times in return for little or no actual work for the company. So the initial indictment also charged Madigan with engaging in multiple schemes to reap benefits of legal work unlawfully steered to his private law firm. Wow. So we're talking about engaging in multiple schemes to reap benefits of legal work steered unlawfully to his private law firm. So again, Plunkett Cooney, because of their relationships, hired him. So how much work is actually going there? And how many of these things are considered schemes when you begin to create Strategies LLC and Saver Ministries LLC and begin to get your friends and coworkers appointed on various councils? I mean, at least to me, it's somewhat suspicious. But here, Madigan was actually indicted by the FBI. So they got a superseding indictment, unsealed, with the prior charges, and they added conspiracy on here. Now, not collusion, conspiracy against them to an alleged corruption scheme involving AT&T Illinois. Boy, back to where Chris used to work. Chris Young, I'm sorry, used to work as AT&T. So, and again, it's all about having friends and buddies in order to get these things passed, like that Franchise Agreement Act, in order to tear down the local municipality's power to enforce the law against organizations like Comcast and AT&T. So again, AT&T Illinois allegedly made the payments through an intermediary, a lobbying firm that performed services for AT&T to conceal the true nature of the payments, which was to influence and reward Madigan's efforts as Speaker to assist AT&T with respect to certain legislation in the Illinois General Assembly. I mean, doesn't that pretty much say it? I mean, how are laws getting passed now? Hopefully, we've got to look at how things are happening in the state now, and we kind of understand that all these things end up in court cases that are draining the public's budget because the left hand is suing the right hand all over the stuff that's created by people that formerly sat in these houses on behalf of these corporations, which are basically being represented by the state when these laws come into question. So although the members of the conspiracy formulated a pretextual assignment for Madigan's ally to disguise while the ally was being paid, the ally performed no actual work for AT&T Illinois and had no role in advancing the legislation. So there is a conspiracy thing going on, even though certain people didn't actually do work for one of those consumer companies. So here they got, they're going to be arraigned on a future date in the U.S. District Court. By the way, the former AT&T Illinois president, Paul Sciazza, he was charged in a separate indictment with participating in a conspiracy and committing other offenses. And I don't know what crime of committing other offenses are, including using a facility in interstate commerce to promote unlawful activity. So the U.S. Attorney's Office filed a one-count criminal information charging AT&T Illinois. So not only did he get charged, but AT&T Illinois was also charged with using an interstate facility to promote unlawful activity. So the charges were announced against by the United States Attorney for the Northern District, and these are all the people that are basically being involved with that. So again, the public is reminded that charges are not evidence of guilt. So this article doesn't mean that they're guilty. The pages that I've shared, from the My Strategies to his raising money, to the use of a nonprofit church organization, to having people seated over on the governor's council, to any of the employees that are, employed in a legal organization like Plunkett Cooney, which could be as a legal firm, a lawful firm, having legitimate business purposes and reasons. Just because I'm sharing all of this doesn't mean anybody's guilty. Again, all I'm doing is showing that this is there. It's a fact that this was found on their page at the time that I collected it, but what it all means are all my opinions. All of my conclusions have no legal bearing because they are just conclusions and opinions. But this court case is a legitimate court case as found, and what my conclusions are there have no bearing and no value other than that they are my opinion. Again, it's a fact that this was there, and what all these things mean. The highlights are added on my own, and what I think about statewide management systems and the Attorney General's office and the corruption that we have going on is, again, like it says here, not evidence of crime because I said so. My opinion is just that. It's my opinion. And so they are not evidence of guilt. Everybody is presumed innocent. And so it's only conclusions and opinions of my own that make these conclusions. So on another note, here is a copy of the actual grand jury indictment, or sorry, not grand jury indictment, but indictment against Madigan. So a grand jury, special grand jury, actually charged the former Speaker of the House. And so you can, if you wanted to take a look at that, you can find a copy of that. So Madigan and Getzendiner was a law firm with offices located in Chicago, Illinois. They specialized in contesting tax assessments made on real property and seeking reductions in such tax assessments for the firm's clients. So he was out there using his relationships to basically reduce his clients' taxes. So they go through, again, relevant individuals, state laws involving bribery, which was one of the charges that were brought up, official misconduct, acceptance of money against prohibition, legislative misconduct. I think what we've been talking about here is pretty much legislative misconduct. I mean, to think that the laws are passed and created by the legislature and to find out that they're actually being developed and presented by government relations groups for the purposes of helping companies get through, work around, and sidestep our municipal powers and our local ordinances is rather alarming, or at least it should be alarming. So, I don't know whether Tom Leonard or anybody else should be indicted for this, but that's what I found as I looked through who Tom Leonard was, and which led me to Plunkett Cooney, and then to seeing who Chris Young is, which, by the way, notice he's also not listed as an attorney like the others are. Partners or attorneys, he's he, him, and his. I don't know if he's actually an attorney or not. Just I believe he's an ex-AT&T employee that's got a whole bunch of friends, and he used to manage the money for AT&T with all the people in the legislature. So that benefited Plunkett Cooney to bring him over there and have him work. So local lawsuits in Michigan, as well as the Madigan indictment, is out there. So didn't make anything up, and I hope you've enjoyed the opportunity to take a look through this. I've certainly enjoyed going through it again. And if you got a need, and you go ahead to get a law passed, you need to hire a firm that can actually help you sign the law real quick and get the governor to sign it in record due time. So I imagine that this was probably might have been during the time of Governor Whitmer as well. So, and that's also not to say that BAMF isn't a beneficial organization. Perhaps everybody thought that they were a needed entity, and so it was best to get that certificate of need for them. And so I don't know anything about BAMF's business or their need or their legality. All I noticed was that this part right here was rather alarming to me, thinking that laws were actually done differently than this. So thanks again for sharing your time with me and allowing me to share this with you. And bye for now.